All right, Carl. So one of the, I've been thinking about this many of our conversations in the past, not many, but over the last year, and I keep coming back to. It's amazing. I record so many of these, but something has really stuck in my mind from what you and I talked about. So I thought it was important to get you back on here because what's happening in Minneapolis and all over the country since Trump came back into office in regards to ICE, I think back to what you said in regards to. And maybe I was interpreting it wrong what you said, so you correct me. There was an easier way to do this without all these theatrics of ICE agents going in and physical, the drama and the violence and whatnot. And you talked about employers and landlords. If they went after employers and landlords, there would be nowhere for illegals to work. There'd be nowhere for them to live. They would self-deport, and then anybody from other countries would know, well, what am I going to do here? There's nothing for me to do.
Right.
So, go ahead.
That's a 50-plus-year-old law. Actually, at this point, I think it's close to 70 years old. It's passed in the 1950s. It's 8 U.S.C. 1324. It's been on the books forever. It states that harboring, providing transportation, or otherwise enabling illegal immigration into the United States is a criminal offense. It's felony. And employing more than, and there's a graduated scale on that, but employing more than 50 illegal immigrants in a year brings criminal sanction upon the employers. And we're not talking about fines here. We're talking about prison sentences. Okay, so if you know, and the there is a standard there for knowingly doing it. So, but on the other hand, you have all of these charitable organizations, all of these, like the guy that murdered Laken Riley, all right, and it's fair to say he murdered him because he's been tried, right? Or the girl in Iowa, all right, that was killed, Molly Tibbetts. That guy was convicted, so we can certainly fairly say he murdered Molly Tibbetts because he went to trial and he was convicted of murdering her. Okay. He was an illegal immigrant, illegal Mexican. He was in the United States. He was being housed by the farmer on whose farm he was working. That farmer knew he was not a legitimate United States citizen. He knew this. He's staying in a trailer on his property. All right. Off to jail you go. All right. You throw people in prison for this kind of thing. And by the way, the penalty for harboring, if the illegal immigrant kills somebody, is life in prison. It's 10 years simply for doing it. 20 years if they commit a crime of violence against someone, and life if they kill someone. Now, if you're a landlord or you're an NGO, you're Lutheran Charities or Catholic Church, whoever the hell these guys are, right? And you're transporting these people all over the place. New York City handed a bus ticket. There's interstate transportation. Handed a bus ticket to the guy who went down into Georgia and killed Laken. All right. That satisfies the requirements under the law for providing transportation. And it's interstate, as with anything federal, you have to have diversity of jurisdiction. So you have to have crossed the state line or in the case of employment, it's inherently interstate because you have tax money that flows, from people into the federal coffers. But as soon as you do that person, whatever entity provided that transportation, that bus ticket, that's a life sentence. Now, how many people would do this if, you don't know what this person is going to do after they get here to the United States. They come in here as an illegal immigrant. Oh, I'm just poor. I just want to work. Da, 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 da. Yeah, and then he goes and he rapes a woman or he kills somebody, and all of a sudden, you do 20 years or get life, how many of these people are you going to do this with? It ends in one day. All right, it ends instantly because nobody is going to take the risk of a life sentence if this guy turns out to be a jackass and you don't have any way to know. So, I mean, maybe all he does want to do is work, but you don't have any way to know that in advance. And if that's what you decide and you're wrong, you pay for it. So, I mean, these problems have easy solutions. And this law is on the books. It is not something that, and in fact, Congress can't stop Trump from using it.
Let me ask you something. Do you know?
By the way, Michael, when Holman first took this job, he said he was going to use that law. He specifically referenced it. Not one charge. Where are they?
Let me ask you a couple questions. Do you know the origin of why that law was put into place in the 50s?
So there was a large push to get rid of illegal immigrants after World War II in the 1950s. And I don't remember if this was actually part of Operation Wetback, but it might have been. I'd have to look that up. That was an Eisenhower thing, I believe, but I'm not sure like what the dates were on that. I mean,
that's okay.
So but I mean that was that was one of those things. It was basically so essentially the essence behind this was that it was get the F out. However, if you want to come into the country to work, there's a way to do this. Okay, I just pulled it up while we were talking. 1954. So yeah, it's probably directly in line with when this law was passed.
Now, in the case of Lincoln Riley's killer, was the state of New York the one that transported this guy down, or was it one of these NGOs that you? And you might not know the answer.
I don't know who wrote the check. Okay, I don't know who bought the ticket, but apparently so essentially the bottom line was that he had a brother in Athens, and by the way, he was also here illegally. Okay, and so he wanted to go there, so they stuck him on a bus. At least I think it was a bus or I think it was a bus. But anyway, they gave him transport. Okay, and whoever bought that ticket, whatever entity bought that ticket, life in prison. Now, how many of those tickets do you think that would be bought after that indictment issued? Zero. Nobody's going to take that risk. That risk comes and gets you 5 years later. There's nothing you can do about it.
Well, how about Florida and Texas? They were, especially Texas, Abbott was filling the buses up and shipping them in the interior. I mean, from what you're saying, that was illegal in and of itself.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Unfucking believable, man.
I mean, across the board, all of this. Yeah, state. You have to, that's like all this crap that's going on right now with this stuff in Minnesota.
Okay? We'll get to that, but we'll get to that. But I want to add one more thing.
The fact that you're a state employee does not exempt you from federal law. There's no shield from federal law by being a state government entity at all. None.
They were never serious about mass deportations when they came back in.
No. Trump lied from the top down.
Why aren't they serious about it in your view, Karl?
Well, so something you have to understand about fraud in the first place is that any kind of fraud, no matter what it is, person who does, it's always easier to steal than create, right? I mean, it's pretty basic stuff. If I want a car, you have a car, it's easier for me to steal your car than to make enough money to buy a car. All right? I mean, it's basic facts. Okay. Now here's the problem. When I steal your car, I now have the $20,000, $30,000 that I would have otherwise had to spend to buy a car, and I can spend it in the economy. If I steal money directly, I spend it into the economy. What does this do? This makes GDP go up, and it makes the stock market go up. And who doesn't like a roaring stock market?
I didn't know if you were done or not. That's why I was waiting for a second. So you so you bring these people in, you give them money, they spend it in the economy, it inflates the numbers, it makes the numbers look better than what the reality of it is. And here we are, this big fugazi.
Oh, it's worse than that. If I make $100 and that's my profit, and that was a 3% growth rate, next year it's $103. Now I have to make 3% above 100, so now I have to make 103. The year after that, I have to make 3% on 103, and so on. This is an exponential series. So once you start doing it, this is one of the big failures. I talked about this some in Leverage back when I wrote the book. One of the primary failures of human beings is that humans in general do not understand exponents. They believe that there is a free lunch that can be had in an exponential series. There is no such thing as a free lunch, ever. The laws of thermodynamics are not suggestions, and they prohibit it. So you can't even break even. I mean, that's the lesson of thermodynamics is you can't win, you can't break even, and you also can't avoid playing. So if you want it in 3 simple sentences, there it is. Okay. But people believe that there is a free lunch. And the problem with, okay, we've got 3% growth, 4% growth, whatever, is this exponential curve. Once you let fraud into the system and people are no longer creating, they're stealing, next month I have to steal more. Because otherwise the growth stops. I'm not spending more money in the economy. The only way for me to spend more is to steal more, since I'm not producing anything. Well, eventually you get to the point that billions of dollars are being stolen on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. This is how we ended up with the medical system going from 4% of our economy to 20%. And it's also how we ended up with billions of dollars being stolen across the country in various schemes and scams. But the same thing happens with labor when you start doing this with illegal labor because, we replaced 10 American workers. Well, that means we didn't pay FICA and Medicare tax. That's 15%. Half of it they paid directly off their check, the other half the employer paid, but that's a 15% advantage. Even if they get paid the same number of dollars per hour, that's a 15% advantage. Well, what do you do to follow that up next year? You got a 15% advantage this year. The stock market wants to see a 15% advantage next year. How are you going to get another 15%? Once you build this expectation in, you've got problems. And this will continue until it reaches a point of destruction. And that's why we're having the issues we're having right now. But in many areas of the economy, this has been going on for 30 years.
Well, that's my so we're shifting over to Minneapolis. Right before that, though, also, like if ice were to come through Phoenix, because there's so much construction going on right here, it'd be dead.
Yeah, it should be.
Who would build these things? But this is the way people think, though. At the top, who would build these things? Who would do the landscaping? Who would work in the restaurants? So that's the other thing, that they were never serious about any type of mass deportations.
No, but here's the reality. Before all this stuff really got going, let's just take roofing, for example, because that's one of the places where, it's full of illegal Mexican labor, right? Um, and it wasn't that long ago that roofing was a union, well-paying, blue-collar job. It wasn't that long ago. And it was all Americans. It wasn't Mexicans. It was Americans. And it was good money. But then you get this, well, how do we make our stock price go up? Okay. Well, one way to do it is to find a way to take 10% out of the labor cost. Well, how do you get 10% out of the labor cost? You break the union and bring in Mexicans.
Now, the fraud, specifically in Minneapolis, this is stuff that I'm going to assume, they've known about. This is not something that started last week.
There was a formal report filed on this within the Minnesota government in 2019. This is before COVID. There's probably some reporting and whistleblowing that goes back before then, but if I remember correctly, there was actually a formal referral in 2019 that was ducked.
Didn't you find the story with Nick Shirley, the journalist, and Bob, who still don't know Bob's last name? Didn't you find that the timing of that just very interesting, that he put this documentary and all of a sudden it got exposed? And I don't believe these things happen by accident.
No, neither do I. And, but there's an old saying when it comes to fraud and things like that, which is that, and any other kind of bad thing, which is there's never only one cockroach. Okay, when you see the first one, that just means somebody, one of them was dumb enough to be out when the lights came on, right? There's never only one. And this, when you go back and you take a look at like some of the stuff that was done during and after the pandemic, and the speed with which some of these organizations accelerated, it's absolutely totally stupid. The number of meals that were allegedly served to poor kids in Minneapolis, for example, exceeded the number of children that potentially, under any set of circumstances, could have possibly been there to eat them. Now, the obvious question is, where's the invoices to the food companies? Where's the inspections of the kitchens? You want to run a bar or a restaurant, you have a commercial kitchen. That requires health department inspections. Where are the health department inspections? Where's the licensing for this? Where is the certification for the people that were preparing and handling the food? Because, cold food has to be held at 40 or less and hot food at 140 or above. And all of this has to be monitored and people have to be trained. Where's the evidence that any of this stuff was done? How did they get business licenses? Business licenses are issued by counties, typically. So did Hennepin County actually send inspectors into these buildings? Where's the inspection reports? What do you got a commercial refrigerator? Doesn't have any food in it? You got Somalis going out of Minneapolis airport with literal millions of dollars in cash going through TSA. And nobody flags this? It's not believable that they didn't know about it. It's just not believable.
Why do you think this story's coming out now then?
At some point, as I said, at some point you get to the point that someone looks at the numbers and says, that's so effing ridiculous. It doesn't pass the giggle test, right? I mean, this is why these kinds of ever expanding scams always ultimately collapse, because the world is not enough, to take something from James Bond, right? You always have to have something bigger. There always has to be something more. There always has to, and it keeps going until finally somebody looks at it and says, what do you mean 34,000 kids were right? Where's the 34,000 kids?
And how much bigger do you think? How much bigger do you think that this thing is? It's not. It's outside of one city, probably the whole country.
Everywhere. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere.
Suburbs where you live too. I mean, you think it's limited to?
No. Well, there's already fairly significant evidence that this is in Ohio, for example, that it's all infused through Ohio. Ohio is, of course, at least technically a red state. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some of it here in Tennessee. I think it's an absolute certainty. Oh, by the way, Seattle's mayor has said that she has absolutely no interest in investigating any of this. Excuse me? All right. I mean, when you've got 20 home health places, all of whom are registered to the same address, and it's a roll-up shop door place somewhere, you're joking, right? I mean, this uncovering this kind of stuff is dirt trivial if anybody bothers to just take a rudimentary look at it. All you got to do, I mean, this all's in a database for the business licenses and everything related to this, right? So you know what? Why don't you just run a simple SQL query, group by address, group by registered business address, right? You get a printout, you got 40 different places all in one place, and then you pull that up on Google Maps, and it's a taqueria. Excuse me? You got 40 places registered to a little Mexican store that sells tacos. I mean, what are you talking about?
You think? I've said this. I'm going to ask you. We're in a civil war. Not a kinetic, and it's not like
not yet
north south. The movie Glory and whatever other analogy from that period. But you've got local and state not cooperating with federal and pushing back and forth. That's a civil war to me.
Well, yeah, it pretty much is. One of the things that I find very interesting about this is that there's a lot of people who have tried to excuse this in some way, right? And what I've pointed out to people is that the danger that's in this kind of a paradigm is that this is exactly the kind of scam and embedded stuff that was going on prior to many other serious breakdowns. I mean, if you look at what happened in the Weimar Republic, of course, we all know about the hyperinflation, and then this funny Austrian painter showed up and said, I can fix everything, but there will be some compromises that must be made. We all know what happened after that, right? But if you think about how Weimar happened, Weimar was imposed upon the Germans by the Treaty of Versailles, by the United States and our allies after World War I, because Germany was a bad guy and we had to spank them. Okay. So we imposed upon them a requirement to drain essentially a tax on the German government that they could not pay. It was impossible for them to pay it. So they did what any good government does when you get back to in a corner. They started emitting credit, and people call it money printing, but it's essentially minting. I mean, it all ends up. It's done different ways. Historically, people shave coins. They do all sorts. They do all sorts of stuff. But at the end of the day, what it boils down to is that they're diluting the base of the monetary system, regardless of the mechanism. And it gets to the point that people are walking around with wheelbarrows full of marks in order to get a loaf of bread. All right. And then the problem that immediately comes from this is the guy who's making the bread, He can't buy anything with what he gets, so he stops making it. All right, well, this is, and the end result of this was a war, a really ugly war, and a lot of atrocities. All right, you look at what happened in Bosnia. Nobody knows precisely exactly what set the Bosnian Civil War off. No one is sure. No one is sure who thought it was a good idea to go shoot. But somebody did. Somebody got mad enough to go out and say, F this. All right. And as soon as the first guy did it, everybody else did it. And this is where the danger is, Michael, in that and this happens around the world. This is why you should read history, because you're supposed to learn something from it so you don't do the same stupid crap again, right? It always ends up in the same place. The powers that be, the government, whoever, never thinks it's going to degenerate to the point that something like that will happen. And there'll be plenty of times, like this stuff that's going on right now. It's all local. It's just a bunch of kooks that, are going into churches and raising hell. Don Lemon is speechifying and disturbing the peace. And this crazy chick pulled in front of an ICE agent and got plugged because she ran him over. She actually hit him with a car. Those people are saying that was murder. Well, excuse me. He had a phone. It's probably an officially issued one running. She was staring straight at him when she accelerated at him. That was not an accident. She hit him on purpose, and he did not. The phone got knocked out of his hand. That's when he drawed. He did not have a gun in his hand. He had a phone in his hand. Okay, he drew after she hit him, and yet people are, well, listen. If I'm standing in a parking lot and you deliberately run me over with a car, and I have a gun, I'm going to shoot you. I'm not a cop, but I'm going to shoot you. That's a felony assault. And, that's all there is to it. It's very simple. By the way, he was treated for internal bleeding. Most people don't understand exactly how serious that is. He's a very lucky son of a bitch. He very easily could have been dead. Okay, with internal bleeding, you have absolutely no idea precisely what is going on and how bad it is. I'm sure they stuck him in an MRI and took a look at everything else. But if something ruptures in there, oh boy. So, typically what they'll do is they'll hold you for observation for like 12 or 24 hours. And, they've got all kinds of monitors on you and everything else, because if your blood pressure suddenly crashes, they need to do emergency surgery right now. But you don't want to cut somebody open if it's not necessary, because that trauma could actually cause you to bleed out right there on the table. So, that's, it's a no joke thing when that sort of thing happens and that kind of injury is done to somebody. He's just a lucky SOB that he's not dead. But the idea that he was in some, that there was some justification for her to do it, that's nuts. That's just nuts. And all it comes down to, when you think about it, Michael, what's the real logic here? This guy's a Nazi, so I can run him over. That's essentially what it is. Right? Is that I've got a cop at my door that says, get the F out of the car. And I decide that instead, I'm going to run the other cop over who's standing in front of my vehicle to get away. Where does anybody get the idea that if you run from the police, this is going to end well for you? We all learn this. Hopefully, somebody tells us this before we get a driver's license. At some point, you're going to be in a car. The lights are going to come on behind you. And maybe you were speeding, whatever the situation is. But at that point, you have one decision to make. You're either going to cooperate. If you're right and the cop's wrong, you're going to go fight it out in front of the judge. That's choice number one. And the only other logical choice is you kill him on the spot. You kill every police officer you see right there, right now. And if you do that, your life is over. They are going to hunt you down. They're going to get you. No question about it. But those are the only two logical options, because whatever you did originally, any sort of resistance you put up just adds another charge and makes it worse. If you started with a speeding ticket, now you've got a felony eluding and fleeing charge on top of it. So instead of a $100 fine, you go to jail for 2 years. I mean, that's crazy. But this is the kind of stuff that's going on right now. Where does somebody get the idea that this is something that makes any sort of logical sense, any sense, under any set of circumstances? And the only thing I can come up with is that he's a Nazi, therefore it doesn't matter. I can do whatever the hell I want.
I've said to people, if you're a moron and you go down to that stuff, things can happen. And the fact that you're down there, I don't care if you're on the left or the right. I mean, look at people wanted to praise Kyle Rittenhouse, and I have no problem saying this. You go to an area with an AR-15, nothing good is going to come from that. Nothing is good is going to result. And he went through the trial, and yes, he got acquitted. But the stress, the money, was it worth it? No, I would say no. So,
well, I don't know. I'd have to ask him. But yeah, I mean, obviously, there was a photo circulating of some other dude that was sitting near one of these protests, sitting on the back of his pickup truck gate with an unslung AR in his hands. Right now, that even in states where you can carry openly, slung, yes. You pull it out and you've got your hands on it in a firing position. That's brandishing. That right there gets you arrested.
And nothing
you
good.
Don't even have to point it. You don't have to point it at somebody.
But here's nothing good is going to come from that. So this woman being down there, I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad whatsoever. Like what are you doing down there? It's a war zone. It's a war zone.
Yeah, and she was intentionally blocking an arrest. Okay, now here's the other interesting thing about that. There's a federal law on that as well. If you impede an arrest, you are liable as an accessory after the fact. There's a federal law on that, and there are state laws on that. And we had a couple of years ago, we had some jackass here that lived in this county, was over in the next one, was across the center line. He was coming up towards an S-curve that is quite dangerous. It was at night. Cops saw him, pulled him over. Thought he was intoxicated. You're not in your lane. Maybe you're wasted, right? Pulls him over, tells him to get out of the car. He refuses. They get into a struggle. She calls for backup. Backup comes. He produces a gun, and he shoots both of them. He kills one of the deputies, hits the other one in the leg, and takes off. The man that he shot died. The other woman was shot in the leg. She managed to get a tourniquet on. The hospital was a quarter of a mile up the road. So she ended up recovering. Okay, so now there's a manhunt after this guy, right? So while they're chasing him, of course, they find out his girlfriend lives not very far from my house. So they're over there trying to collect evidence, everything else. He calls the house. And she says, they're here. 2 words. Instant handcuffs. She's charged as an accessory because she impeded his arrest. She's going to do hard time in state prison simply because she warned him. Now, these guys that are running around up in Minneapolis with whistles and blocking ICE cars, throw every last one of them in jail. Under the federal statutes, if you impede an arrest, you are liable for half the sentence of what the original offense was, unless it was murder, in which case it's 15 years. So, you don't know what this illegal immigrant that they're chasing, you don't know why they're chasing him, you don't know what he did. What if the guy's a rapist? And he's going to draw a 20-year sentence for that rape. Well, guess what? You get 10. Now, how fast would people not be interested in doing that if we started throwing some of these people in jail? The law is clear on this. There's, like I said, it's a chick that's sitting. She's under indictment right now. Right? I don't think she's been tried yet. And there's another one that was in my county, basically the same thing. Bullshitted the cops on an alibi when I think it was her husband, had committed a homicide, and she tried to mislead them, and she got charged as an accessory. Same thing if you drive me, you're sitting in your car, I rob a bank, I get in, you drive me away. If I shot a teller, you get the death penalty along with me. You didn't shoot anybody, but you're an accessory because you assisted me escaping.
The temperature is rising in all this tension, I feel like, right now.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's an inevitability, right? Where we're heading is something kinetic. I mean, obviously things can change, but I feel like that's the direction this is heading. Karl,
Well,
what do you think?
it's like I said a little bit ago. Every time this happens, nobody thinks it's going to go. And the reality, if you look at the numbers on this, Obama, I think it was 2012, deported something like 400,000 people. Now, I assure you, they didn't go willingly. And in fact, Holman, it's the same guy who's in charge of it now, was in charge of it then. Obama hired him. Do you recall anybody burning FBI cars, rioting, shooting off fireworks at ICE agents, going into churches, blah, 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 whistle brigades, ICE out apps? Was there any of that shit? Absolutely none. So what is this really? Is this really about immigration? Or is this about, I hate Trump, therefore he's a Nazi, he's the devil, and anything we can do to fuck him up, we're going to do? Because that second one is really dangerous. Because what you're basically saying is that 70 million people in this country don't have the right to choose who they want to represent them in the government. And if they choose the wrong way, you're going to go to war. Well, that's exactly how you get a war.
So you think we're heading that way right now? Or do you think this will calm down?
I don't know. But I think the very real possibility exists it's going to go that way, yeah. Yeah, because this is the pattern that throughout history has led to precisely that kind of outcome. And that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen because, somebody may come to their senses. But on the other hand, maybe not. I mean, there's an awful lot of belief out there among people on the left side of the aisle that if we keep, if they keep doing this and this keeps escalating and then the Republicans lose the midterm elections, and then we can basically stop anything Trump wants to do for the next 2 years, and then after that, Vance loses the presidency, and oh my God, we're going to lock all these people up that did all this stuff, which by the way is yet another way that these kinds of things can end up going kinetic. Okay, and yet, how many people can you reasonably argue that part of what Trump is doing right now is essentially a retribution tour? Yeah, I think you probably can, right? But at some point, do you have to make the decision that, well, okay, you screwed me, I screwed you, you screwed me, I screwed you, but if we keep trying to screw each other, this is going to get out of control and very bad things are going to happen. Maybe we ought to stop. I mean, you think about, the infamous feuds, Hatfields and McCoys and stuff like that. After a number of generations, I don't even think they knew why they hated each other. All they knew is they did.
What's your assessment of Trump? I know we want to talk about Greenland, but what's your assessment of Trump as we're starting year 2?
Well, I think the man has been an abject failure on all the things he said he was going to do, specifically taking on the cost of living issues. And unfortunately, economics drives a huge part of this. We talked about the illegal labor and what it does to wage bases and things like that. But the fraud is also a tax on everybody. If you think about this, Michael, just think about this in mathematical terms. I've said this to people and they look at me like I've got six heads. If I steal $1 billion from some government program, I manage to steal $1 billion. That essentially costs every man, woman, and child in this country $3. Okay, that is exactly the same thing as me robbing every single person in this country out of $3. Now, $3 will not these days even buy you, in most places, a beer, right? I mean, well, it will if you buy a six-pack at the store maybe, but, certainly probably won't get you one at the bar. All right.
And not a good one at that matter either.
Yeah. But, well, Natty Light is Natty Light, right?
Depends how thirsty you are.
It does. But, all right, so that's $3. But now, what if I steal $100 billion? Or some group of people steal $100 billion. Now that's $300. And what if we manage to steal $1 trillion? Now that's $3,000. That's your grocery bill. Oops. By the way, in the medical system alone, there's 20% of the economy today. Okay, the economy is about 30 trillion. So that's 6. 2/3 of it is stolen. At least. And all of it's been a felony for over 100 years. Insurance companies cannot negotiate prices. It's against the law. It was ruled illegal in 1979. It's a felony. But that's just the start. Then you have all the billions that were stolen by the Somali fraudsters. And it's not just in Minnesota. It's all over the country.
I'm sure it's just not Somalis either. I'm sure there's other ethnic.
You can bet your last dollar it's not just Somalis. Okay? And I bet there's plenty of white dudes and gals involved in it as well. The chick that supposedly ran the ring in Minneapolis is white. She happened to have a whole bunch of Somalis involved in it, but the supposed ringleader, okay, it crosses the line. It crosses different things. You look at the stuff that's going. Here's another example. You look at what's going on right now, like with technology. These AI companies have forward purchased all of the memory capacity for at least the next year, maybe the next 2. Okay, every single piece of electronic equipment on the planet uses memory chips, has RAM in it. This has had the effect of, for example, a fairly, like the desktop machine that I use here to post-process video and do stuff like that. If I wanted to build that machine today, instead of being a $4,000 computer, it would be about 12. Now, think about the impact everywhere else in the economy of this. You want to hire a new person to sit at a desk in your company. Well, to do that, you have to have a computer on their desk. The price of that machine just doubled. Can you still hire the person? By the way, monopolizing, fixing prices, restraining trade is a felony. Doing it in collusion with others means everybody goes to prison. These companies are putting up these data centers where there is no power available to actually bring them online, and yet they've bought all this memory on a forward basis, but there is absolutely no physical way for them to put that stuff into actual service in the present tense. The buildings don't exist, and the power doesn't exist, even if they were to get the buildings up. So what was the actual purpose of buying forward all the memory? And it's to deny other people access to it. That's illegal. It's just Somalis, huh? I don't think any of those guys are Somalis.
How many people's retirements, 401ks are invested in these companies?
If you own an index fund, 90% of the gains that you've seen in the last 2 years have been from those firms. If they crash, all of that is going to go poof. Every last dime of it.
You think we're closer to that coming to a head?
And part of what I think is unwinding it and is going to force the unwind is that you're seeing bond market activity in Japan that has literally, I mean, in the modern financial world, never been seen before. There's an awful lot of carry trade activity that's still, and it's, people were talking about in the 07, 08 timeframe. There's a lot of that sort of stuff that still goes on between shores when it comes to treasuries, and the reason is that treasury bonds from any major nation, okay, Japan, the United States, not so much China because China's currency is not convertible, but all European stuff is convertible because euros are convertible. Basically, what that means is there's no export control on cash. Okay, China has a two-phase currency, which is really weird. So you really can't do it with Chinese bonds, and I don't know that you want to ink with. They'll steal anything that's not nailed down. But Japan has always been considered, in the post-war era anyway, a stable industrial consideration. So, from a standpoint of their government and everything. If that unwinds, then that ends up polluting everybody else, all right? Because that is part of what drove everything on the way up, and the leverage that's in those transactions is enormous. In many cases, it's 10, 15, 20 to 1. Well, if that comes apart, it's going to be very bad. The same kind of thing is going on in the cryptocurrency area. And there, in my opinion, it's even worse because you have this genius act and this idea that these guys have come up with that they can pay yield on what is supposed to be a currency. And they're all pissed off that Congress is making serious noise about preventing that from happening. Well, it has to be prevented from happening because the dollar bill in your wallet does not have a yield. It's risk-free. That's the entire point. These dollar-tethered cryptocurrencies like Tether, if they're going to be currencies, they cannot have a yield. If they have a yield, they're not a currency, they're a bond. That means it's possible to lose money in them. Well, these guys want to have it both ways. No. All right, but this is part of the thing here. How solid are the books on these things? How solid is the auditing? Who believes these guys? What happens if there's absolutely nothing behind them? But they're being used as a transaction mechanism to get money in and out of other actual currencies like dollars and euros. And as it turns out, it's total air. There's nothing there behind it. Or even if it's not 100% BS, even if it's 1% BS, the point is it's not supposed to be any. Okay? So, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff like this in the market right now, which is extremely unstable. And I don't see, so artificial intelligence generally, my biggest issue with it in the general sense, and I'm speaking as a programmer here, okay? I mean, I've only been doing this for 40 years. I might know a little bit about it. Actually, more than that now. God, it's been close to 50. It has. But if you look at the basic issue that arises, you go to any of these things and ask it something about you. Now, you, of course, are the absolute authority on what has happened in your life, right? You know more about it than anybody else. I hope. people do this all the time, and they find that it's listing jobs they've never held. It's listing degrees they've never had from institutions they never attended. People are filing court documents citing cases that never were heard. Now, how does this happen? People say, well, it's hallucinating. No, it's not hallucinating. The computers don't hallucinate. What they do is repeat crap. Where'd the crap come from? Somewhere off on the internet, in an unbounded data set, somebody posted some kind of garbage. And your name was in it. And that got ingested into its data set, and that's how it came up with that. It was complete bullshit, and it doesn't have any way to know. Now, you'd say, well, but since you know this, you could challenge it, and it'll chase it down, and it'll fix it. That's not good. That's bad. It didn't bother to do the work in the first place, did it? So now you have a lazy computer. All right, that is spewing crap because it didn't bother to verify what it was about to tell you. And of course, it doesn't know that you're the authority. But here's the basic problem. If I already know the answer to the question, I don't have to ask an AI, do I? I only ask the question if I don't know the answer. What happens when this thing tells somebody in an employment context that this guy has a PE? He's a professional engineer. He really doesn't. The bridge gets built, and you're driving over it, and it collapses because he didn't actually know what the hell he was doing. Same thing in the medical realm. Yeah. There's no money to be made here. Where there is use for these things is against closed data sets. But that's a tiny, these are small models. You can run this on a desktop computer. You don't need these huge data centers for that shit. If I point one of these things at my customer base and the invoices, what they've bought, what I have in stock, and ask it to predict what someone might want to buy, okay, that's it, But database engines can do that now. These are just faster, and they have probability weights associated with them, so they come up with different guesses. But that's what they are. But against a closed data set, everything that it ingests is a fact. Against an open data set, it doesn't know what are facts. And it has no way to sort it out.
Yeah, my friend Melody Wright, we've talked about this. She said, I think this whole AI is a smokescreen for how bad the job market really is. And it's easier to blame it on AI. I know we want to talk about Greenland, and I know I'm limited time with you tonight, but
yeah. So yeah, that's one of my predictions for this year was that shit's going to hit the fan and market at some point this year, and that the AI stuff's going to start to unravel. And I've seen absolutely nothing to dissuade me from this, and every piece of information I see when these kinds of examples come out, and there's another one every day, just reinforces that, yep, that's how it's going to go down. And like I said, I've been doing this for a hell of a long time, so I may not know anything about AI specifically, but I've been writing computer code for a very long time.
You think the market crash will be fast and furious, or will be slow?
I don't know which is worse, because an immediate, really serious crash, people will buy. Okay, far worse than that is a 10 or 15% big drawdown, and then it just grinds lower for a year or two. Which, if you look at the pattern, which you get, it's really tough to know how that's going to play. All right. The 08-09 thing, there's going to be all kinds of people that are going to say it's going to be a replay of that. And, 6 months after it starts, you need to be all in, Yeah. Okay. You could get a 1930s scenario. You could get a 2000 scenario, which was several years. If you need the money in the interim, you're screwed. So, yeah. I don't know which way that would end up going. My suspicion is that it unwinds a lot of things just beyond the AI sphere. That's the risk from the standpoint of a long grind lower.
That's why I think this is almost like it is a perfect storm, because look where we're at culturally, look where we're at
Yeah.
economically, look where we're at. I mean, you look at 2008, but we weren't culturally a disaster like we are today. Socially, we're a disaster. 2008 was not like that. It was just an economic crash.
Well, the other thing is that we don't have the fiscal ability to maneuver on this one. We've already got just in the first 3 months, we've run $600 billion worth of deficit. That's over 2 trillion annualized. It's 2.4. Okay, that's just the first 3 months. And that's with all the tariff collections. We still ran a $600 billion deficit. So the idea that all of a sudden we can go out there and we can just pump, another $2-3 trillion into the economy to try to offset it. Not unless you want inflation to be 11% and the long end of the bond curve to go out to, blow out to 11 or 12, which it will. By the way, that makes your mortgage like, 13.
You got time to talk about Greenland? I know we're.
We could spend a little time on that, sure.
What's up with Greenland, Carl?
Okay, so a little history. Truman tried to buy Greenland right after World War II. They told him to go to hell, and he just kind of, okay. He wanted it for the same reason Trump wants it, because if there is a Russian attack, it will come over the pole, and particularly in the context of a nuclear attack, a missile, strategic launch, that's exactly where it's going to come from, or for that matter, these hypersonics, that would be the way you'd expect them to come. So, and that's just physics. Okay, it's the shortest distance to get there is across the pole. Greenland, by the way, if you take a look at the places where those would come from, and the known bases in Russia where they would shoot from, and assume that they're going to target Washington D.C., you'll find that basically all those paths go right over Greenland. So the reason to have a defensive force there is kind of obvious, right? I mean, it's not very hard to figure out. Here's the thing. We had something like 36 bases in Greenland during the Cold War for exactly this reason. And the agreement that allowed us to put them there is still in force. It has not been repudiated. We have one active base in Greenland today. We shut them down. They didn't throw us out. We just walked away from them because we didn't think they were all that useful anymore. Now, all of a sudden, we're thinking maybe they are. Okay. So that's the why. And it's logical. Trump is being his usual loud, buffoonish way of doing things, but that's why he wants it. Now, here's the problem. The people of Greenland are, of course, under Denmark, right? Well, most of the people that live there are of Inuit descent, partially or fully. That's the largest contingent of the population. There's others. The discovery and the colonization of that hunk of land is rather interesting. It includes Vikings showing up over there and then them leaving, and all kinds of other crazy stuff. But the modern dispensation of it, if you will, came out of the post-World War II period of time. Now, if you take a look at the current government they live under, they have one of the highest, maybe the highest, it's awfully close if it's not the highest, individual tax burden of any country in the OECD. Okay, so among developed nations, they pay they have the highest cost of living, or very close to it. And think about where they are and what they have as far as industry and how they live, right? I mean, this is not a trivial thing for these guys. But what they get in return for that is, number one, their health care is covered because it's socialized medicine, all right? But more importantly, they get stability because their government has been quite stable under which they live. Therefore, the costs are known and the benefits are known. Now think about, Trump supposedly tried to bribe them with the idea of $100,000 each to basically vote to secede and join the United States. If you believe that a people have the right to choose their government, then you would have to support a democratic choice by the people who live there to do this. If you don't believe that, then you have no right to claim America as legitimate, because we kind of did that, and then we threw the British out when they told us to go to hell, and we shot them, okay, when they refused. So this is the legitimate democratic way that people choose their government. That's fine. But here's the issue. They don't want us. They aren't particularly enamored with being under their current control, and in fact, they'd like more independence or even to be an independent state. But they don't want us. Now, why don't they want us? And this is where our government, on both sides of the aisle, had better wake the F up and stop being stupid. Because on the numbers, if you look at this, the average person without much, some earnings capacity, but not a huge amount, but he's got a job, his total tax burden is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20 to 25%. That's 15 for FICA and Medicare. All right, you pay both halves, whether you think you do or not. Your employer pays the other half, and if you're 1099, you get to pay both. But that's from the first dollar, so there's no escaping that. And then your income tax bracket is 0 or 10%. So, that's about what it works out, 20, 25, somewhere in there. Okay. But remember, these people up there are used to extremely harsh conditions, and stability to them means life. You don't live long if you're stupid in a place when it's 25 below zero for 4 months out of the year. All right? At all. Now look at what this country has done over the last 6-7 years. You cannot put any new gas furnaces in, you must use heat pumps. How's that going to work out if you're in a 25 below zero place? You can't have any gas-powered vehicles. You must use electric ones. So let's see. We've got sleds and snowmobiles which run on gasoline. You're going to mandate electric snowmobiles? Those aren't going to work. So now I'm down to dogs. By the way, at about negative 20, 25 Fahrenheit, you can't even draw power out of an EV battery, a lithium battery. They'll refuse. They shut off because they'll be irreparably damaged if you do. So the protection circuits cut them off. Then, here comes Donald Trump, and he says, oh no, all the gas cars you want, all the gas furnaces you want, whatever you want for this, that, and everything. Oh, by the way, but at the same time, when the Democrats were in power, if you made $100,000 a year, you paid a couple $100 for crappy but available health insurance. And then on January 1st of this year, at $50,001 of income, actually I think it's 55, but anyway, at $50,001 of income, instead of $50 or $100 a month, it's $1,000, and there's a $10,000 deductible before it'll pay anything. Now, you live in a land where this kind of back and forth bullshit will literally kill you. It's not a joke. And you look at this deal and you say, we take this deal, we're one state out of 51. The other 50 will outvote us. And we're going to get this crap rammed down our throats every 2 years by executive order, or the Congress changes over, or the presidency changes over from one party to the other, back and forth, get it in the butt, don't get it in the butt. Get bent over on energy, don't get bent over. The world's getting hotter, the world's getting colder, you get medical care, no, you don't get medical care, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and all of a sudden that 50% tax rate doesn't look so bad. Because I know it's going to be 50% tomorrow, and I know what I'm going to get. And so I choose to stay where I am. When you have a group of people who voluntarily double their cost of living to avoid getting reamed in the ass by a mercurial government that screws people left, right, and center every couple of years, you are the one with the problem. The government that's doing the screwing, not the country's population that said no.
How do you see that playing out?
Good question. I mean, Trump has backed himself into a corner. When was the last time you saw a narcissist say, "Oh, I fucked up, I'm wrong, sorry"? Okay. I mean, all he's done is yell louder. Is there realistically any possibility that he goes in there with troops and actually physically takes it? I don't think so. Is there a very real possibility of a no bullshit trade war with Europe over this and an unwind from a financial interconnection standpoint? Yeah, that is very possible. How bad would that get? I don't have any idea. I mean, that's where this sell-off came from today in the market. Okay, is that this rhetoric, it escalated to the point that a lot of people start thinking, hey, maybe this guy's actually crazy enough to do something really fucking stupid.
Well, we didn't even talk about the precious metals, what those have done as well.
The metals thing is
You're a metals guy, Carl? You're not a metals guy, right?
I'm not a metals guy. I've never been one. Metals historically have been an absolutely terrible inflation hedge. If you're worried about inflation, you're better off being in common stocks. I mean, that's just the facts. All right. I mean, if you look back from when gold was deregulated in the 1970s, and you took the same amount of money and you split it in half, put half into the S&P 500, put the other half into gold, you'd be out of your effing mind to have bought the gold. All right. You're absolutely insane to have done that. And people say, well, but gold is money. No, gold isn't money. Gold hasn't been money for a long time. Gold's never going to be money again. But it is a very speculative instrument. And on top of that, in the modern era, both gold and silver have a great deal of utility value because they're both used in electronics manufacturing. And specifically, since the ROHS standards came in, and they're pretty old now, you cannot use lead-bearing solder. So the solder is silver-based. So everything that you have that is electronic, if it's been made in the modern years, the solder that is used to put all those things together is silver-bearing solder. And if you want to build electronics, you got to have silver. There ain't no way around it. So it is a industrial metal. Silver's biggest use used to be photography. Well, not no more. Now it's electronics.
So last thing with Greenland then, if Trump's backed himself into a corner and, if a trade war escalates with Europe, what would that look like for people in the United States?
Well,
do you think this would virtually end NATO? Or, Europe needs the United States too much for that though, right?
Well, I think it could. I think it could fracture NATO. That's what a lot of people, that's what people are concerned about having happen. The reality is that Europe is essentially a vassal state at this point. They have screwed themselves with their crazy political policies that they put in place, specifically concerning energy. They don't have a good way out of that box. Okay, you have to be a special brand of stupid to shut down perfectly good nuclear plants and source your energy from somebody you consider to be an enemy, specifically Russia, and then get involved in a war, right, supplying their enemy, Ukraine. What kind of idiot does that when, Russia is a major gas supply? That's dumb, all right? But these guys have done a lot of stupid stuff like that. That's just one of many things. They've never integrated. The failure of the EU is that it is a currency union, but it is not, and a trade union, but it is not a policy union. And it's not, unlike the United States, we have 50 states, we have one federal government. The EU at the central level is relatively weak by comparison. I mean, essentially, I mean, if you think about it, you don't even really have parity across all of them in terms of employment and the ability to move between countries. You do from a standpoint of travel, but not from a standpoint of residence and employment. In theory, it's there, but in practice, it's not. Um, borders, language, culture, okay, and and then on top of that, they brought in an enormous number of African immigrants who have zero capacity to operate at a European level of performance. Zero capacity. And I don't know what the hell they're going to do about that. But, I mean, this leads to structural deficit problems that are worse than ours. And yet at the same time, they've got an energy issue. They have not figured out what they're going to do about that. Green energy sounds wonderful, except for the fact that it's unreliable, and gee, that doesn't work so good if you're trying to make steel or whatever have you. So yeah, they're a basket case, quite frankly, and that it's stuck together as long as it has is a little surprising to me. But where does this ultimately go? I don't know. Could it blow up over in Europe far worse than here? Yeah, but it will cascade into here if it does. Just because we are interconnected from a standpoint of trade, from a standpoint of finance. And the idea that, parts of the EU can basically go kaboom and, the U.S. will be fine. We'll do better than they will, but that's not saying a whole lot.
Where can people find you, Karl?
Market-ticker.org.
As always, thanks for coming back on. I know it won't be that long before we speak again, and because God knows there's going to be a lot to talk about.
Well, there's the ancient Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. So.
Mic drop.